Today is about spirals, and it's actually the default for human movement. It's just not how movement tends to be taught from that perspective. And it's not how people tend to think about movement, which is usually focused on one joint and one muscle action, or maybe a few. The most common example ever used to describe like muscle movement, especially in terms of concentric and eccentric action or isometric, is the biceps and the bicep curl. And it's always demonstrated like this, trying to create something like to approximate a single axis joint action, one muscle group, although there's actually others deeper that are acting across that joint. And that's used to really define terms, but then I think it gives people, and culturally we get the idea that that's how the body moves, that we kind of have this series of hinges. And hinges are single axis, and they're also a very precise single axis. It's not like a thick wobbly hinge, the way that we conceive of them based on doors and things like that. And human movement almost never includes just a single joint or even two neighboring joints, but includes a larger collective. And so the totality of adding together different joints into a complex creates these 3D twisting arcs, in other words, a spiral. So biospiral, which is imperfect spiral, it's thicker in some places. It has segments, it has different degrees of turn versus say a perfect geometric spiral, which has a center point and then opens out or closes in, but it's perfectly smooth and the rate of change is consistent as it's opening or closing. So for us, the spiral is more like that. And then once we complete a movement with a spiral, like let's say I'm gonna go leg to arm, spiral, I have energy in a system which is elastic and recoiling and then has to live in the next moment. And so that energy then has to go somewhere. I either have to slow it down through eccentrically contracting muscles along a whole long line of my body, arcing line, or go somewhere with it. So biospirals usually feed into another moment. And so for humans doing things like walking and swimming and climbing, the next moment is pretty obvious. It's given to you. It's to travel to the next foot or to the next hand. One way to think about it is being built for these spirals that then recycle energy into another spiral. Each rotation, and again, think of it in terms of joint complexes and a full body collaboration, creates stretch. So while you're arcing and turning one way, you have a set of muscles which is now being stretched out. And when that fires, then you arc and turn the other way. And so you get this contralateral, asymmetrical step to step, which depends on all of these winding mechanisms across joints and across joint complexes. When you're doing something like a golf swing or a punch or a singular throw, then you want to generate as much force as you can, assuming you're trying to throw or hit hard or throw far. You want to generate as much force as you can, and then you give it to an object, and then the object takes the force. Without an object here, we'll have to go ahead and recycle it back. We have to recycle it back into ourselves. We can't just hurl our bowling ball into the wall and then let the wall deal with it. That's what makes dancing interesting. Things like this, so repeated patterns that involve the whole body, but in which we're also recycling energy back. And so that's a lot of the training in terms of body weight training and efficiency and resilience training, is how to get those pieces working well so that you respect joint parameters and you allow these arc complexes to happen. So you can find examples of spirals in most human movements. There are exceptions, of course. Unfortunately, most standard fitness movements, which speak in terms of single planes in general, and which tend to emphasize movement toward the front. Squat, deadlift, push-up, pull-up, overhead press, row, lat pull, reverse fly, front fly, all these things which are about moving front and back are isolating movements that doesn't include the spine, it doesn't include rotation in the spine. And of course, there are some that do, like boxing classes, of course, have to include spinal rotation. And we're in this nice era of burgeoning, people would call it mobility or movement classes like this one that are specifically based around being able to move the body in more complex ways efficiently in many different orientations and also in different environments too. But if you take the twisting potential of the spine, and that also includes flexion, and you combine that with the pelvis and the power of the large muscle groups of the legs, that's how you get powerful punching, the spine plus pelvis, and then everything else, and then transferring force up to the arms and out to a racket or whatever you're using, out to your dagger. So a lot of the same mechanics can be trained to help people in different disciplines, especially if you understand conceptually, because then you can apply it to specifically what you're doing.